So I had to learn to be cool with failure and to not being an instant success and giving it the time, and then realizing that the only way that I actually fail is if I give up. And if I say this is too hard, I'm not going to do it.
Absolutely.
And so once I kind of got that mindset, then things started to flow and the business started to succeed.
Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Tiffany Alexander and this is Unveiling Journeys. I am so excited to have you here. If you have been here already, welcome back. If you haven't, I need to tell you, I'm so fond of networking with high-level people, going sometimes to some networking groups and attending masterminds and learning so much from so many people. My newest coin phrase is I want to be sometimes like the dumbest person in the room so I can only look up and learn from all the incredible people that I get to hang out with. And if you are watching this and you're thinking you should interview so-and-so, introduce them to me. I would love to get to know them and you. And with that, here's the deal. I have an amazing guest for you today, and we met networking, and I get to let him unveil his journey. So with that, let me introduce to you Steve Heumann. Welcome. Oh my gosh, thank you for coming on the show today, and tell us a little bit about you, who you are right now, and what you're up to.
Sure. Thank you for having me, Tiffany. This is great. I always love talking to people. And yeah, I love networking too. So it's always wonderful to meet new people. So I own a storytelling company currently. So I started it 7 years ago. I help people to tell their stories. So I'm an author myself. I write and publish. I'm a published author. I write sci-fi thrillers. But my and so that's an important passion of mine. But I also have a passion for helping people to tell their stories, their real stories. So, they're the stories of them, how they started their business and how they failed and how they succeeded and all of those things in a very authentic way. And I help them to write and publish those books so they can serve their business or they can serve their legacy and that sort of thing. And so it's been a really wonderful experience to be able to get to know people incredibly well through this process of helping them to write and tell their story, helping them with covers, getting it published, and then watching as it affects their career, as it affects their life, and helping them really to have a very powerful and profound respect for their own story.
Hmm.
I found that most people undervalue their stories. And when I see that change and when I see people take a deep respect for what they've been through, the good, the bad, the traumas, all of it, and when they start to understand that they are their story at the end of the day, and those experiences led them to where they are at that moment, and generally that moment is good. And so it's like they can take a little bit more of appreciation for all the crap that came before and all of the bad things and all of that because they realize, okay, I was able to use it. I was able to get through it. I was able to absorb the failures. And now here I am telling my story proudly, and it's going to do good for me, good for the reader, and good for humanity. And that is
Yeah,
so.
I love that. How long does this take for someone to you get to hear them out and then you're telling your story? And do you get credit, by the way, or is this like all in private?
Nope, it's all private because for me, it's not my story to tell. I am the medium that the story is passing through so that it doesn't suck at the end of the day. So that the story is readable so that you can't put it down, but it's not my story, it's theirs. And so I don't take any ownership. I get paid to do what I do and then I send them on their way because they want, obviously, so there's two different reasons. One of it is that their time is more valuable than their money, right? I mean, that's why most politicians, most famous people, their time is better spent elsewhere. And so they pay a ghostwriter generally to write their book. And that's really, really common. And so I work with people whose time is of more value than them sitting down and spending the next 5 years trying to write their book, right? And the other thing is that it's just when you've got someone who is a storyteller and has been my entire life, and I can tell fiction and I can tell nonfiction, your story just ends up better. And then plus with the process that we do with the interviews and stuff, I tend to go deeper and pull more out than they would on their own. And I help the story be more authentic. So there's a lot of pros to the entire process. And generally, like we can get it done in about 3 or 4 months as opposed to 5 or 6 years, which is what the average is of when someone tries to write the book themselves.
Right, right.
So yeah.
Do you do storytelling for companies too, or just like one-on-one humans?
Yeah. Yeah, I've done both. I've done it where a company is like, hey, we want to have a book that talks about where we've been and we want to have multiple people's perspective in it. And it's like, okay, well, then we'll interview those individuals and then we'll parcel it together. I started out in television And so I ran a television production company for 15 years, and we produced TV, wrote scripts, did the whole shebang. And I found that when doing these books, to me in my brain, it felt very much like editing video. It was, okay, I'm taking what they've said and I'm adding a little bit of narration and I'm moving things around because conversations don't tend to flow in a way that a book needs to flow. And so I can move it around. And to me, in my brain, it just was like using an editing program. I was like, okay, I'm moving it here, I'm adding my narration, I'm doing this. And so it was a very natural kind of progression when I started helping people to tell their stories and ghostwriting and doing all that stuff because I saw it that way. As strange as that sounds,
Yeah, no,
I
it makes sense.
saw it in those exact same terms.
I just think, yeah, because when you read something or your well, multiple versions of what you should be reading, I write like how I speak, which is in multiple run-on sentences. So I don't think I would be the best at doing this. Like, are you gonna have a period in there here and there? I'm like, no, it's all one thought. So just it's coming out like conversation. You don't see where the periods are at the end of everything. Oh, okay. This is so cool. I love what you're doing. You have a lot of fun stuff in the cases in your background. I want to do this. Tell me from the beginning, like where are you from? And was this something you knew you were going to do your whole like childhood? Like what did you want to be when you grew up? Let's start in your childhood.
All right, so that's interesting. So I grew up in Southern California, a town called Chino. Great place to grow up. I'm the youngest of six, so I had five older brothers and sisters, and they were all quite a bit older than me. Like they were all born like a year to 18 months apart. This was back in the 60s and 70s, uh, and then there was a 4-year gap, and then there was me. So they all were kind of a unit, and I kind of was on the tail end. And I took solace as a kid in storytelling. I remember literally stealing my sister's tape deck. I mean, this is dating me, right? And putting the blank tape in there and recording my own adventures, like talking about Superman and Batman and telling these stories until my sister would get ticked off and take it away from me because it was her tape deck, right? And so from a very early age, story was an important part of who I was. And at one point, I remember sitting down, and I was 9 at the time, and I started drawing my own comic books
Hmm.
because I love the visual side of storytelling. And I had never read a comic book before in my life, but I was just like, I like this kind of sequential story, so I'm going to start doing it. And then my older brother, who was 18 at the time, took me to the comic book store. He took me to a newsstand. Like comic book stores were very rare back in, this would have been, 80, 87, right? They existed, but they were few and far between. He took me to a newsstand and bought my first comic. And so that started what has become a love affair with comic books to this day. Once a month, I still go to the comic book store. I love that sequential storytelling. So that's kind of where it began. But I did not come from a family that saw that art as a way to make a living. Right. And it's very common. So this
Yeah.
isn't an uncommon thing. It was, you got your job and you did your hobby, but you weren't going to be able to make money as a writer and artist. That was not something that entered my brain. And so all through my youth and my teenage years, I thought about being a comic book artist. I thought of it because I'm an artist, but writing is what really inspired me, telling stories. I was really good at English, man. I was really good at English. Whenever they would have any kind of creating writing thing, I could blow the doors off. But again, I wasn't that's not how you made money. You couldn't do
Mhm.
it. No. So I graduated from the University of Utah. We moved to Utah when I was a junior in high school, which is where I live to this day. I live in Salt Lake City, and so I went to the University of Utah and I got a degree in communication because my artistic side that made sense. It's like, okay, you
Yeah, it
got
does.
advertising, you got marketing.
Yeah.
I can't make money as a writer, so I might as well do this. And then it just so happened that I needed an internship to graduate. And I had a radio show up at the U. And so I was like, well, I'm going to apply. I found two internships. One was at KUER, which is our local, basically PBS affiliate for the radio. And the other was for a television production company. And I was like, well, that sounds kind of cool. The cool thing is that the television production company was about 3 blocks from our apartment where my wife and I lived. So I was like, well, that's easy. So I applied. They got back to me first. The production company did. I heard back from the radio station the next day, but I had already taken the one in TV. And that kind of set the course for my life because I started working as an internship at this independent television production house. They produced a television show called At Your Leisure, which is on ABC, and it's an outdoor adventure show.
Yeah.
And so I started as an intern. And then they hired me as a freelance writer to write scripts. And then they hired me full time. And then within, I don't know, 2 years, I was running the production company. And I did that for 15 years. So I ran that production company. And during that time, we grew. We started producing documentaries, started producing films. We started producing other television shows, geek shows, because that's where my heart is, right? We did all of these things. And it was a wonderful experience. I got to travel all around the world and film and meet great people and work with politicians and do all of these amazing things. But it started getting to the point where I wanted something else. I wanted to grow. I wanted to have something of my own. And the company wasn't growing in that way. It was, the owner, the CEO, who was my mentor, he was in a place of like, well, we've got this and this is cool. And I just felt pulled towards something else. And my wife and I sat down and we were like, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? Like, I don't want to work for another production company. Why would I?
Yeah.
I've got something really cool here. I don't want to work in news because news is cutthroat. Like, most people don't know that television news is about as cutthroat an industry as you can get. It is brutal. And I was like, I don't want to work in news. No way.
Right, right.
I don't want to wake up with a knife in my back every other day.
Right, right. Or just like nail biting, did we do like what we have to do?
Oh my gosh, you could do a full on hour-long drama, weekly drama on working in a newsroom. They've done comedy ones, man. You could do something um like any of the most hard-hitting dramas you could do in the behind the scenes at a newsroom. There's so much just backstabbing and ego and all of that stuff. So I didn't want to work in that industry, and we decided, well, what would we do if we started our own business? What if we became entrepreneurs? And that was really outside the realm of anything that I would have considered, because I was like, well, I don't understand how that works. I don't know how you can live without like a steady paycheck, like having to drum up the business. I don't know how that works. How does that? But we felt really strongly to just do it. And so we were like, okay. So I had some mentors. I talked to them and we dove in. So in 2018, we founded Superhuman Creative. And I was like, okay, well, what does this business even look like? So it formed around basically three ideas. One of which was for me to be able to write my own stories, my own fiction, and to publish those and to have a publishing house and to be able to get those out in the world and sell them and do all that stuff. So we did. And since then, I've written 10 full length sci fi thriller novels, published them, sold them, done all that stuff. And so I get to tell the stories that I would tell into that recorder when I was a kid, right? I get to now do that and sell that and make money telling my own stories, which is wonderful. And then we're like, okay, really
Wait,
good
wait, you're going
video.
too fast. Like you're skipping over so much cool stuff. I need to know more about this. You're blazing through like in as a kid and getting internships, and now it's going from this newsroom to like, what was that like? That transition of like, I really can do this on my own. Like some of
Oh, it was, I mean, it was probably similar to every other entrepreneur. It was wild and it was hard
yeah.
because you get into it and you've got to learn a few things in that process of becoming an entrepreneur and running your own business. You've got to become very comfortable with uncertainty and realizing that, okay, it's on me, yes, but it's also it also comes down to my grit and my inability to quit. And so you've got to get used to that and to having like, okay, well, obviously there's not going to be a paycheck every week. I've got to get clients and I've got to build relationships and build friendships and ask for help when I need it. And then I also have to realize that just because I think something will work does not mean that it will work. You have to iterate and you have to test and you have to try and you have to fail over and over and over again and realize that each of those failures is good. So I had to learn to be cool with failure and to not being an instant success and giving it the time and then realizing that the only way that I actually fail is if I give up. And if I say this is too hard, I'm not going to do it.
Absolutely.
And so once I kind of got that mindset, then things started to flow and the business started to succeed. And everybody told me, oh, it's going to take 3 years to become profitable. It's going to take 3 years. So I was like, guess what? It took 3 years. It took 2.5 years before everything started gelling. I was making money and it was good. And so that's what I tell people too. I was like, well, it's probably going to take between 2 and 3 years.
This is hopeful for some people that are in the thick of it. Oh,
Yeah. Well, I mean, you hear about the overnight successes, but that's rare. Most people, it took them a few years to kind of to fail enough that they had it figured out. That they had, okay, this is how I succeed. This is how I make things happen. And it was the same thing with me. It took me that amount of time to be like, oh, okay, I've now failed enough. I've tried enough things that didn't work. I've now stumbled on something that does.
You're like living the actual quote that I tell people when they're like, "Do you have your favorite quote?" I'm like, I mean, I have a couple because when you're an entrepreneur, you fail like a lot, and it's by Bruce Lee, and it's the master has failed more than the student has ever tried.
Yeah,
And it's, like,
exactly.
so true because you actually don't truly fail in it until you just quit and you give up on yourself and you just can't, and or surround yourself with the right people that you need to keep. I mean, don't get me wrong, like, you could hit your head against the wall for something really silly you're trying to do, like putting cats into space, I have no idea, but generally, yeah, you're gonna have some failure along the way, and you gotta be persistent in it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I found. Is that if something doesn't work, well, then you move on to the next thing. You try and figure it out. And once I got my head wrapped around that, then suddenly everything started working. And I was like, okay. And that's kind of where the ghostwriting came in because I started out with writing my books and then the video side, where I was like, okay, I'm really good with video. I can tell documentary stories. I can help businesses tell their stories. And then really quickly, I learned that on the book side, I was like, well, that's where the real need is. Like there's videos a dime a dozen. I hate to say that, but it is.
Yeah,
The way I do it is different and unique because it's very personal and it's a little bit deeper. And I was like, but at the same time, any videographer could figure that out and could do it. But on the ghostwriting side, that's a very rare skill. And so it wasn't something that I kind of like plotted out saying, I'm going to become a ghostwriter. I'm going to help people tell their stories and I'm going to like it. It was something that as the business started to transition and to move, I was like, wow, this is really a need. Maybe this could be something that I should pursue. And then I found that I really enjoyed it and that I got a great deal of fulfillment from helping people to tell their stories. And so that in and of itself was also just a progression of learning what works and what doesn't work. And then also the other thing that I would tell people who are looking to become an entrepreneur is that things have a life cycle. Not everything works. You got 5 years of this kind of working, and then just naturally things will change. And so you've always got to be willing to pivot and say, just because it worked last year doesn't mean it's going to work this year.
right?
Yeah, you've always got to be kind of ready to jump to the side and to strafe a little bit. And if you can get into that place, in that mental health place of being cool with that, then there's really nothing that can stop you because you're gonna find the solutions. You're gonna find solutions that other people haven't found, and you're gonna be able to really do some great things. But yeah, I had to learn all of that stuff because it didn't come with my childhood upbringing. It was something that, as an adult at 40 years old, I had to figure out.
Mm,
And every day, I'm hopeful that my kids are paying attention and that they'll be more of that mindset, so they won't be afraid of that risk. That they'll be able to jump in and be like, I can do this. I can solve the problem myself and I can make money doing something that I actually love to do, as opposed to just putting my head down at my desk and suffering through it.
100%. I try to teach my girls the same thing, like, "Mom, I wanna be this, I wanna be this." I'm like, "That's awesome, and you know what? You can change your mind in along the way." Because my littlest said she wanted to be a doctor, and I had something, like, weird, it made my eye red, like, a month ago, and I was like, "Look at my eye." She goes, "Oh, I can't even look. I can't," and I was like, "I get the feeling you're not gonna make it as a doctor."
Yeah.
Like, "That's so cool. Can I lean in and touch it?" Just to see their little personalities coming out of it. But I wanna ask you a question about, transitioning from writing into for scripting and stuff like that, to going into writing for other people and telling their story. How did that start to happen? I can't imagine one day you woke up, was like, "Let me interview you and write a book about it."
It was definitely a transition. It started with my own books. That was the first step. One day I was like, I had written these scripts and we were trying to get a full length movie produced and we were dealing with all of the stuff that goes into that. And one day I was like, you know what? It would be easier for me to take some time and write a novel because writing a novel is easy. That's what I had in my brain. So I started writing this book and it was based off of a script and it became eventually my first published. But I sat down. I was like, well, I'll start writing it. And it was literally. I remember it was a Friday afternoon. I was at my offices, and there was nobody else there. Somebody else. People were out on shoots and stuff. The receptionist had to go home early. My boss. I was literally alone in the building, and I was like, well, I'm going to spend the next 2 hours. I'm going to start this book. Why not? And then I wrote like the first, I don't know, 5 chapters, and I got it to a friend of mine who was an author, who was a published author. She was deep into that realm, and I was like, here, take a look. And she got back and she was like, well, you don't know how to write a novel. And I was like, cool. Okay. Well, what do I do? So she started talking me through it. And I was like, okay, cool. I got it. And then I wrote the entire book. And then I went to a writer's conference literally the day after I hit the end on the first draft. And I remember, this is so embarrassing, Tiffany. This is so embarrassing. I remember thinking, well, I don't know why other people need second and third and fourth drafts because this thing is perfect, obviously.
You're so humble.
Stupid. So I went to this conference and I was like, well, obviously writing a book is easy. And I was going through the courses because there was, it was a conference. And so you went to the different courses that kind of appealed to you. And I went and I really very quickly was like, wow, this doesn't sound like what I thought. Like this
Mm,
sounds like really hard. And that all of these people have written all of these books and they've never published anything. Like, what's that about?
yeah.
And by the end of the day, and then they had this competition, and I had put my first chapter in the competition. And at the end of it, and I didn't win. Like they announced it, and I was like, "Oh man, well, okay." And then you get critiqued by the judges, and they submit those to you, and they absolutely ripped me to shreds, rightfully so, like hardcore. And I remember going home at that night and just being like, "What? What is this? Like, what is this world that I've entered into? This isn't easy, and this sounds like what?" And so I realized at that point that, okay, this was real business and real competitive and not something that was easy. But I was still inspired enough that I was like, okay, well, I'm going to give this a try. So then I started doing things correctly. I went to critique groups. I started going to classes. I started listening and saying, okay, this is how all of this stuff goes. And then things they would say, like they would say, you always hear as a writer, show, don't tell. That's what they say, show, don't tell. And I was like, it's a freaking book. It's all tell. What the hell are you talking about? Like,
Right.
show, don't tell. It's all words. And then I started to understand what those sorts of things meant. And I started to be able to see them in my writing. And then I had these critique partners who would again rip me to shreds until it got to the point that I was no longer being ripped to shreds and my stuff was elevated and it was good. And then it was right about that time where when all of this was going on with the transition to start the business, that book was done. And I was like, okay, now it's time for me to get a professional editor, pay this individual, and let's see whether or not this is real. And luckily, that friend who had read my book, she was a professional editor. She was a published. She was in all these circles, and she was like, "Hey, since this is your first book, give me the first couple chapters now, and I'll tell you whether it's ready to edit. And if it is, then we'll go for it." And I was like, "Cool." I gave her the first the course. She got me back to me a couple days later. Was like, "Dude, this is great. Get me the rest right now. Let's get you taken care of." And she edited it and loved it. And then I got into the publishing and I had to learn all that stuff. And then I started writing books because obviously it was my day job at that point, was writing for myself and for other people. And so after I got that stuff done and I got through my first couple of books, that's when the doors really started to open up for people like, hey, I need somebody to write my memoir, or I
Uh,
want to write a business book. How do I do this? And I was like, well, let's sit down and let's talk and let's figure this out. And I realized very quickly with my mind from the video side, I was like, well, this is how I would do it. I don't know if this is how anybody else would do it. This is how I would do it.
yeah.
And that's kind of how it started. And it turned out that that was how most ghostwriters do it, the way that I was kind of like, well, this is how I would do it.
Does that end up coming from like a referral? Because I can't imagine you slap on your website one
No,
day like, I'm
it
ready for it.
Yeah, it came from a referral. A friend of mine was like, well, you're a writer. I've got this friend and she's writing her memoir and she is having a really difficult time. Would you mind, like, she knows what a ghostwriter is. Have you ever done it before? And I was like, well, no, but it can't be too hard. I mean, at this point, I've written 5 books. Why don't you have her talk to me? So we talked and then we did an interview where I asked her questions. Then I got her a chapter. I was like, let's just run a test and see. Because I need to capture your voice. It needs to sound like it's you and not that it's me. And we need to do so. We did that. I got her the chapter and she was like, oh my gosh, this is great. Let's do it.
Oh, hang on. This is like blowing my mind. You are not just a writer in the way that you write. As a ghostwriter, you have to convert yourself almost like you're an actor on paper. You are becoming this character of this person. This for some reason, this perspective of a ghostwriter like just hit me hard to be like, you're doing this as an actor, right? Like you're being this person. This is so incredible perspective to consider that.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, that's exactly how it is. Because we'll interview, and obviously, a lot of the words that'll be on the page will be theirs, but not most of them because of the fact, like we established, when you talk, you don't talk in a way that can be translated to a book. You've got to translate that essence down, and it's got to sound like the person. And so I can take direct quotes from them and pop them in. And then I've got to then take the bridge material and move them to the next point, but it has to sound like them. And so I've got to get inside their kind of their head and be like, okay, here's how things are flowing. Here's the words that they use. Either they use a lot of punchy sentences, or they're very long-winded. In which case, the stuff I've got to do, but my job is to cut that down so it doesn't sound long-winded. But if they use generally longer sentences, then I'll do the same. And I've got to match that cadence so that when someone reads it, it sounds like them. And it takes a little bit of skill, but obviously, as an author myself, I have to do that with my characters. I have to get inside their head. That's part of being an author. If your book is going to be really good and really readable, the author has to inhabit that character just like an actor would, because you've got to see the world the way that they would see it. And that goes back to the show don't tell. Like, you don't tell someone that, you don't say, oh, John walks into the room and doesn't like any of the furniture because he doesn't like 70s style furniture and blah, blah, blah. You don't do that. That's telling. Showing is me understanding his head of when he's going to walk into a room and what he's going to critique and what he's going to look at and go. And if I can get in that, then I don't have to say that he hates 70s furniture. He's going to look in and look at that chair and go, and then the inside the head, the narration is going to be like, John grimaced as he looked at the red, the bright orange chair, reminding him of his grandma and the cigarette smoke that hung in the air. And he almost wanted to gag. Okay, that right there that shows his visceral reaction to the furniture in the room. So I've got to get inside his head. And it's the same thing with ghostwriting. I kind of get inside, okay, what was their perspective on this? Because I've had individuals that, like, there was a gentleman that I worked with. He was from South Africa, and he was telling about, his book was a business book, and it was about risk, about the joy of risk. But he talks a lot about his personal story when he was in the military, the South African military, in the late 70s, early 80s. And it was conscripted. He was forced. He had to be in the military. And so he tells just the horrible experiences that he had, that it was just really, really brutal. But we get in there and we were doing it, and he's like, oh, I'm just not, like, I wanted to be a little bit more visceral reaction to things as I'm telling the story. And I was like, well, do you remember a lot of the details? And he's like, not really. And I was like, well, do you care if in kind of your voice, I just BS some of these details? Like of the smell. He's like, no, do it. Because I don't remember. It's like, I
Yeah.
remember what time of year it was. And I remember it was cold. And I was like, that's enough. That is enough. And so then I was able to, in his voice, go through and add some of those things. And when he read it, he cried
Oh,
and was like,
like
okay,
a little
this is,
PTSD
yeah.
relief of that. It's cool.
Yeah. And so once you get into kind of that space, once you get good enough at it and skilled enough at it, then you can do that. And you can add the details that they no longer remember. Because at the end of the day, it's not always about those details. It's about the emotion tied to those details. So if I get into, the cold and how it bit at his fingers, obviously that's a very universal sort of feeling, right? So I'm sure that he had that feeling. But then for him, it recreates the moment in his mind, and he's there. And then it does the same thing for the reader, even though they were never there. It creates that moment, and they may be able to experience, and it becomes very visceral for them. So like when we describe him being on patrol one night and then coming back in, and one of the guys who had been on patrol just before him had died by suicide, in there, I was able to place him in there with all the emotion, and the reader then felt that emotion too.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's part of the gig. But it really, I like that. I like how you described it as an actor, because it really is that sort of, it's very, very similar.
Because if you're having trouble, well, I mean, I guess you just write stories for people, but no, you become them and then you get to put that on paper. And I never considered that portion of it because, some people are like, oh, I write stuff or I ghostwrite stuff. I'm like, what's the difference? Like, oh, you can just write in your own perspective. Like, oh, I had pasta today and it was good at this restaurant. Or like, this person's story and the feeling and yeah, that's so fun. I guess the interesting part is you don't get credit for some of the stuff you've done. I mean, do you sign like NDAs to swear you never like did it?
Sometimes, most of the time, like I'll have developed a relationship of trust, and I have a reputation at this point that they know that that's not gonna happen.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's for me, like I said, it's not my story. I'm a medium. It's passing through, and so I don't want to take credit for those. For me, I love when I can read the reviews
Yeah.
and people are touched by it, because I know that part of me is in there, and so I can take pride in that. And I love when, they hit number one on Amazon or something like that, because it's like that was something, it poured out of my fingers as I was typing. And it's their story, but now it's been amplified. And like I said during the interview process, like, because I know what questions to ask. I've interviewed for decades. When I worked in TV, we interviewed people. We sat down with the camera and we interviewed people. And so I gained that skill of how to just dig a little bit deeper
Mm.
and how to phrase things so that you're able to pull out those little nuggets that the author wouldn't have found themselves. They would not have dug that deep. They would have put the words down, gotten it out into like, but I know what questions to ask in order to really find those jewels that they wouldn't mine for. And when those hit the page and they see them, that's part of where that pride in your own story comes from, because they'll then read it and it is their story and they're just like, wow, like this is worth telling. And it's like, yes, exactly. Your story is worth telling. Everybody has a story. That's one thing that I learned in TV. We
Yeah.
could sit down with anybody, pop up that camera, start asking questions, and a story would come out. Something that that person experienced or something that they did. And you just be like, what? Like I've done it with people that I know. And I'm like, why did you never tell me this before? That is the most amazing experience ever. Why
Right?
aren't you shouting that from the rooftops? I'm like, oh, well, it's no better than anybody else's story. And it's like, no, but it's your story.
Yeah, yeah.
So start telling it.
I love all the little pieces that I feel like you've even ignited in my own mind to understand. As a kid, we didn't watch a lot of TV. That what we did was we popped a tape in and we hit record. And I actually had a talk radio show where I would interview people and I would pretend to be people.
We were on like similar tracks, man.
I can't believe it. But and here I am years later on a microphone and I'm like hanging out with you and I'm interviewing people out of a different perspective of just wanting to really understand it. Because even the engineer in me, I'm like, when I meet someone, or I love going out to like networking events back when we could have them a lot more in person. And I would see someone's bag on the counter. I'm like, can I look at your bag? And they're like, excuse me. I'm like, I'm just really curious. It's almost when I meet someone, can I look in your head? Can I can I see what makes you tick? I I find that humans are so fascinating that the reason why they think things, and we can't even hear what everything that everybody's thinking. Everybody would probably freak out if we all heard our internal thoughts, right? But to get people to live their life in the way they're impacting more people, and I tend to end up interviewing like B2B, like, or they're making such a big mark on people by creating that ripple effect. You're almost a B2B because when you ghostwrite for someone, it affects so many more people by you just helping one person in their story.
Yeah, and that to me is where like the power of it comes from. And I didn't realize this at first. Like I remember talking to someone at a networking event, and it was like a mastermind group. And we were talking about things, and I was like, I really want to make an impact on the world, and I just don't know how to do it. Like I've got 6 kids, I'm super busy. I've got my business. What do you guys think? And the guy was like, well, you're helping people tell their stories. Like that's not like the biggest impact you can possibly have. And I realized it like a switch clicked in my brain at that point. I was like, oh my gosh, that is true because of those connections that get built as someone tells their story. Like when someone is talking and the story is well told, and it touches people's hearts and they realize, oh my gosh, this person has been through something and I can learn from them. And when the story is being told, we do learn. We come away with all of these insights and understanding of not just that person, but of ourselves. Every time someone shares that type of story, it impacts us. And so, just like you said, with the little links that get drawn then between people as they're touched by that story, and when we're gone, like our story, no one can tell our stories. Like I wish that I had interviewed my grandfather. I mean, he passed away when I was 22, 23 years old.
My
Before I
gosh.
had gotten into all this stuff, I was still in school.
Yeah.
I wish I'd interviewed him because I have stories of his that my brother and my dad knew, about his time. He was in the, he had run away from home. He'd been put in an orphanage when he was young. He ran away when he was 15, and ended up being recruited into the Navy at 15 years old. And so I was like, I wish that I had those stories directly from him. And obviously I can't. He's gone. But that's another reason why I'm so passionate about helping people tell their stories, because then they exist. They exist in some form, whether it's in video or whether it's in a book. They exist from your mouth, not someone else telling your story, you being able to tell your story. And there's so much power in that,
Yeah.
especially if you're thinking about it not in terms of like a memoir, not a big fan of memoirs. Obviously, I can help people write them, but memoir is very much like, look at what I did. I prefer the business book term because when you're writing a business book, it can be a very memoir esque. It's your personal experience. It needs to be, but it's focused more on what the reader can learn from your mistakes. And so you go in with the principles and the story behind it. And here's what I learned, and here's what you can take away from this. And so then it becomes a tool of learning, which for me is so much more powerful. The best books, the most powerful books, are as focused on what the reader is going to walk away with as they are on the story that's being told. Because if you can do that, it's going to influence every moment of your storytelling. And I actually found that in fiction as well. I was a big fan growing up of Twilight Zone. Every 4th of July, every holiday, one of the channels in LA would have a 24-hour Twilight Zone marathon. And I would watch episodes of the Twilight Zone. And the thing about the Twilight Zone is that it was always about more than what it was about. It was always a deeper level storytelling that they were trying to get at, a point they were trying to make through the sci-fi, that if you were on that level, you would resonate and it would hit you a little bit harder. And so when I started writing my first book, once I got deep into it, I realized that that's what it needed to be. So I was like, okay, so what is my story actually about? What do I want the reader to come away with? And so I was able to do that. I was able to have a multi-layered story, which is one of the reasons why it was so good. And so with each of my books, I think about it in those terms. What is this story actually about? What is it that the reader is going to learn, or what's going to hit them? And they're like, oh my gosh, that is deeper than the actual narrative. And it's the same thing with helping people when ghostwriting their books. I always have them talk about their purpose. What is your purpose behind this book? What do you want the reader to experience? And when they get that and they realize what that purpose is, it affects every story they tell, it affects every word on the page.
That makes sense. I guess that's almost something you could have a perspective of in real life. Like, all right, I'm gonna have a conversation with someone. Do I just want to peacock and toot my own horn, or do I like want to leave them with something? Like, I always want to leave people with like encouragement. Like, hey, I need you to understand you can do it. Stop giving up on yourself. Keep trying harder. Surround yourself with the right people. And I try to live in that. I didn't realize that was something that flowed so naturally, but in this, you're translating that to paper for people, which seems so cool. I never thought about the purpose in all of this. Now, do you write stuff for people that are just like, I want to tell people how cool I am versus the rest
I
of it?
always tell people I'll cash your check either way, but I always try and steer them to that way because they'll have a better experience, I'll have a better experience, and the reader will have a better experience.
That makes sense.
And I think that that way it creates a greater catharsis in their own story. If they already love their story and they think they're so great that they're just like, look how wonderful I am. It's like, okay, well, that's great. I'm glad you appreciate your story. That's part of what I like about what I do. Let's help somebody else appreciate it in the right way. But I find that most people, they feel drawn toward telling their story and writing their book, and they want to do it, but they don't have the right appreciation for their own tale. And when they are able to switch to that and they do, then suddenly telling their story becomes very easy. And they're doing it for the right reason, not to toot their own horn, but to share their experience and to create a connection with people, because story is the number one way we connect. Like there's a great thing that says if you want to make $1,000 sell an item, if you want to make $10,000 sell a oh, I can't even remember what it is. But then if you want to make $1 million sell a story, you talk about your story, we connect through story. And so when they start to realize the power of their own story, all they start doing is just connecting on a deeper level with everybody around them and creating, these relationships that are far stronger because they're no longer putting up the walls that we all put up. We're really good. Humans are really great at telling stories and putting up walls, of trying to hide our vulnerability. And when you accept your story, the good and the bad, if you're telling it very authentically, and that's the main thing that I stress to people, whether I'm doing video or doing a ghostwriting written book, it's like you have to be authentic. We're not going to pretend you're anything other than what you are. And if there's a bad story in there, we're going to tell it. If it helps the narrative, we're not going to shy away from that. If it's embarrassing, if it's devastating, even, we're going to authentically tell that story. And when they get to that point, it's those moments, it's those hard times, it's those times when they fell on their face and they're willing to share that vulnerability. That's what creates true connection. That's what links people together in ways that are absolutely just transcendent to what we normally experience. Imagine when you go to the networking groups and it's all surface level, where it's just like, hi, I do this and you can do this for me, versus when we actually get to know each other and we're willing to share some really hard stuff, like where we feel where it's like, oh, someone says something like, you know what, let me tell you about one time when I really screwed up.
Oh
And then
gosh, yeah,
suddenly
do
real
those.
connection gets built, right? And I love that. Absolutely love it.
Oh my gosh, this is incredible. At this point, people are thinking, all right, I want to get to know you. What's your favorite way for people to come find you?
For me, they can just, like LinkedIn is a great spot. LinkedIn is good. Just email me at superhuman01@gmail.com. That's my personal email. Feel free to email, spell like my last name. So HEUMANN 01. And if you accidentally leave off the 01, I'll still get it. My wife just stole that email address before I could get it.
How
So I
funny.
will still get any email that you send to superhuman@gmail.
She'll just like, hey, you got it
Yeah, it'll
again.
just go through my wife. But yeah, LinkedIn is really good because you can just send a message and it's easy. You can also go to my website, superhuman.com, again spelled like my last name. And you can just message me on that. Those are really easy ways, but I love talking to people. So I do free consultations. If you just want a few ideas
Mhm.
about how to start your book and you want to do it yourself, I am more than happy to help you with that. In fact, I've written a book called Write to Lead. So WRITE, to lead. This is my first nonfiction book, and it teaches about how to write your story and publish it. So
Wow.
if you're really interested in doing it yourself and you just want to tell your story, you can check out that book and it will give you the tips, all the stuff. But if you just want to talk and say, hey, let's talk for an hour, I'll give you everything I can give you just to help you so that you feel confident in being able to write your story. Because I can tell, I don't know anybody who's watching this. Obviously, we're not communicating with anybody who's watching this, but your story is worth telling. And if you feel that it is, you're being drawn to do it. And if you want to just talk and get a couple of tips to get you started, feel free to reach out because I'm a big believer in the more that we share our stories, the better the world gets. So
Absolutely.
share your story.
Yeah, all those little nuggets and being able to let people feel that, live that, and see that, and maybe grow from it, right? Or
Yeah.
that's why I like teaching people a little bit about investing. It's like they get to learn from the mistakes that I've made because I don't want them to make them anymore. So it's like if you could have the feelings or revelations from the life that I've lived and make everybody's life better along the way, like, oh man, that's so fun. And if you can't find Steve, just send me a message and I'll put you together and I'll be like, hey, listen, you gotta, but also all the links will be in the show notes down below. So, oh my gosh, this has been so fun. I love hearing the way that this all came together and how this works and how you do this for people and the way that it all fits into place with the way you have to become them and you're the actor in it, but also how much you have a heart in this. Like doing this does not clock out, right? Like I imagine, like me, sometimes I wake up at 4 a.m. to check an email, not check, like to write an email. And I imagine you have a notepad on the side of your, I'm gonna write that down, right? Like, man, you're doing so much for so many people. And even if it's just one person at a time, I know you've left such an impact on this. And I thank you so much for all the stuff you're doing and listening through. I relate to you in a little bit of how our parents didn't tell us that this is what we were going to do, and it formed into this, and you didn't quit in it all. Any nuggets that you want to leave with everybody before we go today?
To me, it would just be we are our stories. We are all of the experiences that brought us to this moment. And even if this moment is hard and it's difficult, we're still worthy of this moment. And so that means that everything that came before can be a foundation on which we can build for the future. And once we're ready to tell that story, then we can help other people do the same. So just remember, you are your story, the good and the bad. And once you can take pride in it and realize that all of that crap has built you into somebody awesome, then you can help other people to feel that same.
Man, amazing. Thank you again so much. Everybody, thanks for staying. Thanks for being on, hanging out on the show. And I look forward to chatting with you soon. But also, everybody have a great day and see you on the next episode. Bye.